So by the last week, up to last week, we have mentioned about some sort of knowledge representation. Okay, we learned the schema, we learned semantic network, and we know how the knowledge or information is stored in our brain. So today's main topic, this week's main topic is about memory. The most important part of information design. So when you need to design some information to show your end user, you need to understand two things. Okay, first thing is, what is their information workload? Okay, so you can't provide every information to your user. We have limited information capacity to process, so you have to find what is our capacity limit in our memory, and depending on this capacity, you have to give the right number of information, isn't it? You can't give more than something, right? And two things is, some information is stored temporarily, not lasting long. Okay, some of the information is briefly gone, so that before this one is gone, you have to do something in here to memorize important information. So to do these kinds of things, we need to understand how the memory is structured and how it is processed. The most important things of this week's lecture. Before we going further, so we have two quizzes based on last week's lecture plus leading to our preview of today's lecture. So quiz 1 is this one. Okay, so what I did last week is something about two theories of knowledge representation. So there are two different theoretical positions regarding how memories are stored. One is something theory, the other one is something theory. Okay, first one is we store only the general property of the instance, and the second one is more explicit, clear example stuff. Okay, instance stuff. So based on these two different framework or approach, today's lecture is covering two different theory on model of memory. Okay, if this one is working, we have to know level of processing model in memory. If this one is right, we may need to see different memory structures such as the short-term memory, working memory, bad list experiment, or something more important stuff comes from the second approach. Get it? Okay, so you have to find the answer within. So, right. So the answer is what? Yeah, answer is B. See? Oh, where is it? Okay. D. Oh, no, D is not the right answer because the schema in semantic network is how we can represent the knowledge. So that is linked to the artificial intelligence, right? So that's what I explained last week. Schema is very important. You know that the schema with slot knowledge is a link knowledge or topology, which I mentioned last week. And semantic network is representing the network format. Okay, level 3, level 2, level 1. If you don't understand it, you have to read chapter 5 again. Okay, that is very good for your answer. The second question is very relevant to today's lecture. Of course, that you can find the answer from last week's lecture. This one. Okay, quiz 2. 5 years, dual code hypothesis. You know what is dual code hypothesis? Okay. So based on the 5 years, okay, he said we can represent knowledge in two different formats. Okay, so you have to very careful, okay, to understand knowledge representation and perception. Okay, perception in chapter 3 and 4 we learned there are two different ways of perception. One is what? Visual perception. The other one is auditory perception. But knowledge representation is not the same with our modality or channel. It might be something different, which means B is not the answer. Okay? B should not be the answer. This one is channel. To channel to receive the information, we have two channels. One is what? Visual, auditory. But different ways, knowledge representation is what way? A, C, D. Get it? B is not the answer. See how you are smart. So if someone click B, right? I said B is not the answer. You never listen to me. B is not the answer. A is the answer. See, if you look at the A, okay, the Fabius dual code modality is talking about when we represent knowledge in here, we see visual information representation, and the other one is verbal information relevant to language processing. Okay? So for example, when I read number 1 to 3, that has some meaning. It is visually processed, but if that 1, 2, 3 has a meaning, that's stored in verbal memory, because that is language. But what I'm saying, just saying, is the language. So even though that information goes through to your ears, okay, using auditory channel, that's stored in your verbal memory. Okay, that's what Fabius assumed, hypothesized. Okay, why this one is important? Because the memory structure, we haven't discussed much detail yet, but this Fabius dual code analysis or assumptions is quite relevant of today's lecture to understand how the memory looks like. Okay, I mentioned that memory is very important for information design. Okay, you can't make some information above or beyond our capacity. So that's why you have to learn from today's lecture, how our memory looks like. But everything is the theory. We don't know exactly how it works. Okay, so human memory, encoding and storage. Okay, we can start from these questions. I mean, this one is not the quiz. So look at this slide. So how do we know this information? How do we know these kinds of answer? Who is the president of Korea? Oh, 이명박, MB, we call. Today's date? 12th, 13th, 12th? Okay, what is best friend looks like? Of course, I know that your best friend is me, but think about other people. Okay, you know there's something, right? You know there's someone, right? So voice, your friend's voice. You remember this, so when you call to someone, you already detect, okay, this one is someone else's voice. I mean, my best friend's voice. Okay, so what are your some experience when you first start university, college in here, first day? So you remember that, right? No, you never remember the day, the first day in here, right? How you tie your shoelace. Huh? Tie your shoelace. So how do you know this one? How we know these whole things in here? Okay, we know your best friend, who your best friends are, their voice, and even you know how to do these kinds of tie the shoelace, right? And using computer, you know that. How this one is in here? So that is dilemma. I mean, it's not dilemma, it's a research question. The fundamental research question in psychology is we're trying to understand how we know these kinds of things. What kinds of knowledge we are representing in here. So what is that? If we know this one, we can close to the level of the God, isn't it? The Lord. I'm not religious people, but I can say the people's dream, our dream is we close to the God. We know this one. How we know all these kinds of things we know, we close to them. Okay, close to him or her, we don't know. But I mean, that is kind of fundamental research, say, how we know this fact. This one is fact, isn't it? This one is something like a procedure, right? This one is something like your episode, event. Okay, the nature about all the knowledge is different, so probably we may have something different structure in our memory. Something remember fact, something remember for event, something remember for procedure. That is pretty much scientific approach. I mean, very simple way, the divide and conquer. We don't know whether this one is a separate area or not, but probably this one is the easier way to understand. Some of the information is a procedure. Okay, some of the information is just fact. Some of them is event. We simply assume that probably we can have a different knowledge in here. So the different structure, different memory structure can handle different information or knowledge. So that is basic assumption so far, but some of the people doesn't like these kinds of understanding, so they trying to develop different types of theory and model. That's it, okay, the background, general background. So what we have to start is there are many experiments or many tests in memory. Okay, so I'm just simply do two major types of tasks for measuring the memory. First one is the recall. What is recall? Just remembering, is it from from something else, right? Recognition is different. So recognition is this one. So when you recognize the label, icon, something using your visual perception or auditory perception is called recognition. But recall is you have to retrieve some of the information from your memory. So for your test, well, midterm test or the final exam test, many of you do these kinds of fill in the blank test, like a 주관식 in Korean, the essay test. That is, you have to recall some of the knowledge when you have memorized this stuff. Right? So that is recall. Retrieve some of the knowledge from your memory is recall. It takes time, isn't it? Recall takes time. Recognition is different. Recognition is you just simply pick up one of the answer from your multiple choice. Okay, you have to choose one of them, that is multiple choice, and true false test is recognition. Okay, there are two different mechanisms in our memory and retrieve the information from memory is one is recognition, the other one is recall. This one takes long, this one really fast. That's why desktop computer interface is better than Unix or command line interface, because if you want to use the command line interface like a command copy A and B's, you have to memorize the syntax, right? So that syntax comes from your memory, long-term memory, so it takes time to come up with this syntax. However, desktop interface or graphic user interface, you simply recognize icon and label, you can double click it, right? So that's fast. So in terms of human-computer interaction, the reason why recognition is better than recall is this one. Because this one is slow, this one is faster. This one is always good, sometimes it's not. So that's why we have to deal with in chapter 8, in decision making, sometimes recall is better than recognition, but that is the future work. So memorize these two things are somewhat different, so I'm trying to explain some of the tests to recall. So test to recall. So we have majorly 3 tests being used in this experiment. First, serial recall test. So you do exercise, you should be very careful, okay, from now on. I'm just doing some experiment with you guys. Okay, serial recall test, focused on the screen. Okay. Tell me. What numbers have you remember?
2, 8, 7, 1, 6, 4.
Okay. Right? You're right? Same thing? So this one is, is it same? Something different? 2,
8,
6, 7, 2, 8, 7, 1,
6, 4.
2, 8, 7, and 6, 4. What is it? 7 and 6, 4. What was your answer? 6, 1, 6, 4? Something like that? Isn't it? So this one is kind of test about, no, sorry about, you forget it, right? You simply forget. But the idea is serial recall test is when you see some of the information, you have to serially recall everything in the right order. So we're measuring this one. So how many items they can remember, we can measuring their recalling capacity or recognition capacity. I mean, that is depends on. Okay, that is called the serial recall test. Okay, the other one is free recall test. It doesn't matter the order or sequence. Just remember, okay, as much as you can. Okay, same 5 seconds. Okay, so monkey. Restaurant. Pencil. Dog. That's it? Fire. Oh? So we which one? Bear. Okay. Hair. Okay, sorry. That's it? Is it? Monkey, restaurant, dog, pencil. Time. See? We missed the one. Okay. Likewise, we can extend this number of items to see how much we can recall freely. The next one is something different. It's called cued recall test. The same 5 seconds. You have to remember as much as you can. There are the paired information. Switch? Oh? What? Which? Paper. Paper? I don't know the answer. Anyone else? You forget everything. Totally black out. Is it? I don't know. Okay, let me see. Oh, switch paper, right? Ooh, very good. So likewise, cued recall test, we give a pairs of the word and then see whether they can recall based on this cue. Of course, that is much easier. If we apply the chapter 5's information and chapter 4's information, say if the switch and paper does not have meaning, the relation. So if you say switch, if you see this one, you can remember much easier. Switch and electricity, right? So likewise, in our example, that some of them has a relationship, but some of them doesn't have any, there's no particular relationship. But I mean, if you make a pair of word like a meaningful relationship, we can remember much easier. That we learned from chapter 4, 5. Meaning is more important rather than visual acuity or correct wording. Right, so that is a basic step to understand your chapter 6. In chapter 6, many of the testing we have explained in here. So you have to bear in mind this information for your study. And we have another one. Implicit memory test. This one is something, example is this one. So when I show this one, you have to fill the blank. When you see this one, what can you imagine? Okay, that's the right answer, isn't it? Hong Kong. Hong Kong. No, there's no N in here. Hong Kong. Right. Like implicit test, I can tease you. Likewise, this one. Oh, memory. Okay, someone say memory. Okay, it's really quick, okay, to retrieve the memory, right? Okay, second thing. Okay. Okay. So you did very good, but from this bicycle, your first letter is missing. So implicit memory testing. Something wrong? I see. Okay, implicit memory test is something about trying to retrieve your implicit memory. Okay, so the explaining the things about this difference is the priming effect. We have too many effects, isn't it, in psychology? The priming effect means because you study cognitive psychology, so you are familiar with memory, isn't it? The word memory. If I show this same example to the primary school student, okay, elementary school student, they probably never retrieve this word because they don't have any experience about the memory. Because priming effect is this one. If you are familiar with some situation, you can more easily retrieve the information such as memory. Bicycle is a more common word so that you can easily retrieve it. So implicit memory test is if I give some cue, some people can easily retrieve the information, right? That's the beauty about recognition. Okay? So that's the why priming effect is existing in to retrieve the implicit memory. So this kind of test is kind of test, so you don't need to exactly what it means, so you have to know it, but you don't trying to see what is the main word being used in the memory test. We can just use many of these tests from today's lecture. So that is I'm trying to explain before we study memory. Okay, the memory is that today's main objective is John Anderson summarized like that. That is our chapter structure. Our first slide is this one. I don't need to more something about. We have some different area. Prefrontal, 전두엽 in Korean. Okay, say this one and this one is toward our memory. Okay, from now on is important. From now on is the history of memory structure. Okay, so William James in 1980 to 1970s, he's a kind of philosopher, okay, not the psychologist yet. At the time, psychology was not the major research area. But William James is trying to think probably we have two different types of memory. One is primary memory, which we can process it, like your cache in your computer, cache memory, really fast, but easily forget. Okay, that is primary memory. And secondary memory is something more lasting long and longer and unlimited something. They don't have any experiment, that is kind of suggestion, the idea. Probably we have two different memory, primary and secondary. That is James' theory, James' approach. First one, the first history, the first thing in our memory structure. Okay, second thing is really important thing is Atkins. Probably you know this one, Atkins model. Based on the many study between the James firstly proposed his primary secondary memory and 1968 we have significant improvement in experimental approach or experimental method. So we're trying to say Atkins is well summarized the whole research outcomes like that. Probably we have sensory memory. Okay, probably what he said. We have sensory memory, visual, auditory. Okay. And then that goes into short-term memory, which means very similar with what? James' primary memory. Okay, James' primary memory is talking about the short-term memory. We are very short. That's taught that information is very the briefly memorized in the short-term memory. That is what the primary memory by the James. And then when you have some kind of extra process that can goes into long-term memory, which means secondary memory in James theory. Okay, this one is secondary memory. This one is primary memory. Of course, what Atkins mentioned, the important thing is attention. Okay, this model of mind is the chapter 1's lecture. My first lecture explained this model. Okay, that is around 50 years old. Say, sensory memory, we're receiving it, and then that's stored in short term. And then you have to process this information to move from short-term memory into the long-term memory. If there is no certain process, many of them is forgotten. But interesting part is failure to retrieval. It's not forgotten. If some information goes into your long-term memory, that is stored, but you can't retrieve it. So that is, we believe, simply say that is forgotten. But actually there is no forgotten in the long-term memory. So only failure to retrieve. But in here, we have forgotten. Okay, that is Atkins model. And then, probably in the middle of today's lecture, I'm trying to explain Baddeley's model. Okay, Atkins model, this one is well represent the structure of our memory, but that doesn't say much about triggering mechanism. Okay? It says what it is. Okay? It says what it is, but Baddeley is trying to say how it works. Okay? Approach, point is different. Okay, Atkins model is what it is, what our memory is. But Baddeley is how the memory is working. I'm not saying this one is wrong. Okay, this one is a more latest version of model of our mind. Say Baddeley's point is trying to explain how the memory works out, but Atkins is what the memory is. That is our ending point. We don't have any more from this one yet. So this one is our latest model, and most of the psychologists believe that explains many of the memory problem, and they can predict some of the information in memory. Get it? Three things. What we have to learn, James model, but James model is very briefly explained, and Atkins model, and then Baddeley's model. Right. Okay, so you haven't seen this video, this slide in the week 1 and week 2. I keep talking about these three things. So first one is sensory memory. Okay, the studies in 1940 and 1950, many studies talking about, okay, we probably have a sensory memory, visual memory, and auditory memory. So they want to prove we have these two different types of sensory memory. Of course, we have tactile memory in here. If someone touches you, you can transiently remember that things. Okay, very short time, very, very short time. Okay, so but in visual, the information processing, two major channels is visual and audio, right? So that's why many studies are talking about whether we have sensory memory or not. And second thing is, if there are existing sensory memory, how long they can stay in that sensory memory. How long the information can stay in that sensory memory. Okay? The title is very simple. Sensory memory holds information very briefly. Okay, the definition of sensory memory is the stage of memory that registers information in a very short time. Visual and audio. So that's why we want to study this one. Okay, there are three experiments with you guys. The first one is information is delayed 0.3 seconds. See? Have you seen something? Something happens? Okay, I can show some information in 0.3 seconds. Okay, the first one, 0.3 seconds. Now let me know you have seen something. Oh, okay, next one is 0.7 seconds. Huh? Okay, last one is 1.3 seconds. Oh, sorry. Huh? So, okay, the first time many of you never noticed about that is Atkinson. Second one is Shipping. And last one is me, right? So, using this series of experiments, okay, the psychologists understand some of the limitation of short-term memory storage. Something between that. Okay, if that is shorter than this one, we may not see it. Or something. That is relevant to visual perception. So this one is the first experiment to detect whether people can see some information within a second, or 0.3 second, or 0.7 second. The series of experiment identifies some data, right? We don't need to remember that thing exactly. Find a Google, you know that. Okay? But most important experiment about the visual sensory memory, existence of visual memory, and that the duration things done by 1960 experiment, Spalling's experiment. That is the most important experiment to identify visual sensory memory. Okay? What he did is two things. His first experiment is this one. Okay? Show these 4 letters with 3 glows. Okay? These 12 letters, they show sometimes to participant and then see how much they can remember. That is his first experiment. Okay, the problem of this experiment is many of you can see the 12 letters, but while you talk aloud, you forget the rest of it. Because if there is a visual sensory memory, that is very short time, right? Probably this one, you store these 12 letters in here, but while you're talking out, it takes time, right? So in this time, while you're talking out, you just forget the rest of it. Even though you see 12 letters. Okay, show me. Show you again. Okay. Probably you've seen 12 letters, but while you're talking out, you forget many of them. That is what Spalling said, whole report procedure. Okay? So from this one, he didn't understand how much we have, the capacity of the visual sensory memory and how long. So he made a really cunning plan. That is what he is so much famous in this visual sensory memory. You can do it. Okay, what he did is this one. Okay, now you very carefully, you should be very quiet. We have sound information. Okay. That is low frequency, medium frequency, high frequency. One more? One more try? Okay. Low frequency, medium frequency, and high frequency. Get it? Right. What you have to do is the same information, 12 letters, comes up on the screen, but if you hear the high-pitched sound, you have to tell me the 4 letters on the top row. Middle, if you hear about some middle-pitched sound, you have to tell me the middle rows letters. Okay? Otherwise, the bottom rows. Okay? One more try. You can hear the sound. Okay? Low means bottom row. Middle means middle row. The high is top row. Get it? Okay, I can show the 12 letters. And then you have to tell me what letters you have to remember. You are remembering. Okay. Of course, this one is not a controlled experiment. So the data, Okay. Something like that. Okay, one more. That is only 0.3 seconds delay. No delay, no time delay. When you see the first 12 letters at the same time, you hear the sound. I can give us some delay. Okay. So using this one, we identified the visual sensory memory capacity. How long it can store it in here. How long, okay? Second one. Okay. 두 번째가, okay. 첫 번째가 아닌가? 두 번째. The idea is this one is 0.3 second delay. Okay, the first one is no delay. This one is 0.3 second delay. Okay. That is 1 second delay. Okay? The spelling identified this one. So that is what he did. Exactly similar experiment to what we just did. He identified that is time of delay. Okay? If the no time delay, many of us can remember the letter between 3 and 4. But if the sound is delayed like this one, 1 second, the number of letters remembered is only 1 or 2. That is reduced. Which means our visual sensory memory can store only very short time. Get it? You get it? So if the time delayed, even though that image is pictured on your retina, that's simply gone out after 1 second. So using this controlled experiment, he found that probably less than 0.75 seconds is our visual sensory memory time. Only they can store that short time. Cunning, isn't it? Very smart. A very simple experiment. He identified our visual sensory memory has at that time only. Of course, from this one, we had other experiment following up. Say visual sensory memory capacity is using a timing. Have you seen that? Okay. What letter? E. But that is only 2 letters because we have showed that only 0.3 seconds. If the same information, okay, if that is time delay, FNL, we can see combine, okay, to read rather than 2 separate letters to 1 letters E. Okay, so that is using this who's that? Aberbach and Creel in 1961 experiment also identified our visual sensory memory is very short. Of course, using these kinds of our visual momentum, we make animation, isn't it? Within 1 second, we have put the 24 frames of the picture. So when you see these 24 pictures within a second, we believe this one is moving, animating. So that's the kind of application we use this our visual sensory memory. Okay, so what I summarized from our chapter, the John Anderson was, say, sensory memory hold the information very frequently, and the partial report procedure done by spelling is lead to the more accurate measure of the visual sensory memory, and visual sensory story and iconic memory is the same word, interchangeable, same word. Okay, now we go into the auditory memory, auditory sensory memory. Our textbook doesn't say much about auditory sensory memory, so I just intentionally add up this one. So interesting part of this one is visual sensory memory has a very short time, isn't it? 0.75 seconds or something. But auditory sensory memory is relatively long. That's why we can put warning sign or warning information with the audio information rather than visual. That stored a long time in our sense, right? Iconic memory is about our auditory sensory memory, so I can test with you guys this one, right? Okay, you have to tell me whether 2 sounds are same or different. Same or different? Oh, that is 20 seconds, which means you can store the one information in 20 seconds in your sensory memory, in your auditory sensory memory. So that's why, okay, audio sensory memory is much longer than visual memory, isn't it? One more? Different, same? Different. So that is only 2 seconds difference. So using this kind of experiment, we identify sometimes we can remember some of the audio information more than 1 minute. Okay, the visual is very short, but audio is very different, very longer time. The why we have evolved like that. If the theory of evolution is right, we are evolved to process the visual information much faster. Okay, that's why visual information can store only very little time. Audio, we are not much using it. Okay, in information processing, visual is around 70% of our information processing, and 30% is roughly 30% is our audio information processing. If the theory of evolution is right, okay, if that is right, we say, okay, we are evolved to process more visual information rather than audio information. That's why we have a very short time sensory memory in visual time, but longer for audio information. Okay, that is basics of sensory memory. Now we go into short-term memory by the Atkinson. That is the major part of Atkins model. So what he believed, what Atkin and Chopin believed, that probably we have a short-term memory. Okay, the reason is if the information is directly from visual memory into the long-term memory, it's something unusual, because we can't process some of the information if I'm not focused on something, isn't it? When I pay attention to something, and then I can move this information to long-term memory. So probably we need some middle layer. Okay, not from sensory memory to long-term memory. We probably have a middle layer. It's called short-term memory. Okay, so that is intermediate system in which information has to reside on its journey from sensory to long-term. So they call this one is probably short-term memory, very short-term. Okay. That is what he proposed there. We have sensory memory in here, and then when we pay attention to it, we can put the information in short-term memory, and then we need a rehearsal, keep reminding it, and then goes into long-term memory. That is what the core part of Atkins model. Say a memory model of memory by Atkins is included intermediate short-term memory. Information coming in from environment is held in very short time in sensory memory, and attended information goes into in here, and then information must be rehearsed before it can move into permanent long-term memory. That's what he proposed. And many of the experimental data support this one is right. Okay, so now I'm trying to explain some of the experimental outcomes. Okay, memory span. If this one is right, if the Atkins model is right, if the short-term memory can store some of the information, we have to say how long or how much it can store the information. How much information they can store. So that's why many of the studies talking about memory span in short-term memory. So how many words we can remember, how many chunks we can remember, how many letters or how many digits we can remember. So many of the experiment has been done in here. In particular, Miller 7 plus minus 2 is the very popular experiment or philosophical account to understand our short-term memory limitation. You know the Snow White? The princess, Snow White, 백설공주. How many dwarfs? How many days in a week? How many digits in telephone number? Can read the first 010? 8, isn't it? Rainbow colors? 7. Isn't it? And what is it? What else? Car registration number? 6. 6, something like 6. Musical scale? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. Huh? ID number, yeah, something. Why we are familiar with the 7? That's what he's starting from his research. Okay, and then he made some experiment, and then he found that, oh, people can remember 7 plus minus 2. That is debatable. Okay, some people say we don't have any 7, we have something 4 chunks and 5 chunks, or some people say we have more than 7 chunks we can remember in short-term memory. But the point from the Miller's experiment is we have limited capacity in working memory. We can't remember thousands or 2,000s. We have certain number of information we can store in short-term memory. So before you drink. Before you forget, do you have a drink? No water? Okay. Okay, you finished it. Okay. Before you forget the information from in working memory, you have to rehearse it. Okay, before you forget something, you have to rehearse from your working memory. And then that information can go into the long-term memory. You have to rehearse it. Remind it. Okay, so that is experiment with you guys. Say this one. So Brown-Patterson task is this one. Okay, very tricky experiment. So you have to, very tricky. So just follow what I did. Okay, what you have to do is you have to count backward by 3 from 100. Which means count backward by 3 from 100. Okay, which means 100, 97, 94. Okay, don't talk to me, but I mean just keep doing it. Okay, which means I'm trying to prevent you rehearse the number I will show. Okay, I'm trying to rehearse the number I will show. Okay, so when I say start, you have to counting 3. I'm counting backward 3 from 100. Get it? You get it? Oh, okay. Okay, I will show the number. Now you're counting from the 100. Start. Keep counting. Okay, so number. No. 1, 2, 3. 3, 4, 5. Huh? What? 6. 1, 9. Huh? 5. 0. 2, 7, 1, 0. Serious? What? 650. Okay. I don't know the answer. I have to look at it. Answer was 750. This one is not. Which one? 502. 1, 2, 3. 619, 345. Oh, we don't have a 650, right? Okay, that's the what Brown and Patterson experiment. Say, okay, we intentionally prevent you rehearse it. If I show same number without any interruption, without any, if you can do the rehearse, you can remember these 5 letters, 5 number, like why this one. Okay? So everyone can remember it. Because when you see 1, 2, 3, okay, 1, 2, 3, second one, 1, 2, 3, 6, 1, 9. 1, 2, 3, 6, 1, 9, 5, or 2. You are mentally rehearsing it. 1, 2, 3. Something. Okay. Okay. Okay, that's the what rehearse, make the information moving from short-term memory into long-term memory. Okay, the reason why I ask you to count backward by 3 from 100 is something preventing your rehearsal. So from this one, that is what we have found so far is working memory is limited if we do not have any rehearsed time. See, significantly reduced. Okay, terms of that, we can't remember more than something. So in chapter 1, you also know the Sternberg's paradigm, isn't it? Sternberg's paradigm means if you need to find some number from the list, like number 8, so you need a serial search, 3, 9, 7, 8, it takes such as 1 second, but if you have a longer list at the end, it takes more than 1 second, like 2 seconds. So the Sternberg's paradigm is when you write down in logarithm, say this one is the things in chapter 1 in Sternberg's paradigm. To understand, we have some limit in working memory. Get it? Okay, that is the thing. Right, the second thing, this one has not been explained. Say, okay, that is Artkin's major idea. So they didn't mention much about the long-term memory. They only focus on short-term memory and sensory memory. But in 1972, one of the new theory comes up to explain our memory structure, the level of processing model. This one is not covered in our textbook, but I found that this one is important to understand Baddeley's model. Okay, LOP model is memory does not comprise 3 or even any specific number of separate store. Like short-term memory, sensory memory, long-term memory is not what we have. So Craig and Lockhart say, but rather varies along a continuous dimension in terms of depth of encoding. You don't know what it means. Point is, we don't have any sensory memory, we don't have any working memory, we don't have any long-term memory. We can't separate them out. That is one thing, big one thing. And then Craig say, oh, probably this one. We have a physical processing memory, phonological processing memory, like language, or semantic processing language. Okay, that is 1972, he proposed it. Okay, so Atkins and Shipping's model, they separate the memory into 3, but they don't like that approach to propose LOP model, level of processing model. That is one chunk of memory, but each of the chunk has a different depth of encoding. Some of the information is encoded in physical encoding. The other one is, what is it? The phonological processing, and the other one is semantic processing. Get it? Okay. So now it moved into the Baddeley. The reason why Baddeley's information is important is Baddeley and Hitch, okay, he's my old colleague in England, so what he did was something about, okay, Artkin's model is separate sensory memory, short-term memory and long-term memory. But he doesn't like this kind of approach. He is more like LOP model is fine. Okay? LOP model, we just explained it, right? Previous slide. He believed that LOP model is fine. However, many of the experimental data say Artkin's model is right. Get it? But what he believed, the LOP model is much nicer. So he combined them. So he combined Artkin's model and LOP model like in this way. I can explain later on. This one is what he proposed in 1990s. Say we have phonological loop to process verbal information or language information that comes from LOP model, isn't it? Phonological loop, phonology. See? Okay, that comes from LOP model. And visual spatial sketchpad is also comes from LOP. This one. Get it? Okay, so they made and this one is central executive control these two slave system. So that is slightly different between Artix. Artix model is just say what the memory is, three storage. But what is the Baddeley's one is trying to explain whole thing. In his original theory, he doesn't say anything about long-term memory because he believed that we don't have any long-term memory because he believed LOP is nicer. LOP, where is LOP? Okay, he doesn't say anything. Okay, the major difference between Artix model and Baddeley's model is Artix model include the long-term memory. The Baddeley's one is not considering this long-term memory. He believed that that is one chunk of memory. Okay, this memory is needed to process in working memory. But he just changed his idea. That is latest model. So in 2004, what Baddeley's proposed is, okay, this one is same thing, this one is same thing in his original model, and he ended up with episodic buffer, like event memory. And then this one is linked to long-term memory. That is latest model by Baddeley. So in his original one, he doesn't include long-term memory, but now he includes the long-term memory too. So that's why I'm saying this one is theory. One of you guys have to attack this model with a new experimental data or something else to explain better way rather than this one. Okay, so you understand the general picture of the model of theory? Okay, so we can go back. Only simple thing about working memory. So many of you will interchangeably using short-term memory and working memory from now on, but more academic of definition is short-term memory is only talking about very small area about working memory. So if you want to say working memory, that is more nicer term, much nicer to study psychology, in particular cognitive psychology. Working memory is more common term rather than short-term memory, but many of the normal people are interchangeably use it. But you guys, because you learn cognitive psychology, better word is working memory. So the definition by Baddeley 1986 was memory system that provide temporary storage for information that is currently being used in some conscious capacity. So he didn't mention anything about long-term memory. So probably some information is actively processing it. We call this one is working memory. Just working memory. Okay? Okay, that working memory. So point is, what Baddeley's interest is how we can interpret this working process. So he proposed three different types of, it's not type, three different mechanism, process. One is visual spatial sketchpad. That process visual information. Like spatial information or visual acuity, visual perception is done by this visual spatial sketchpad. And the other one is phonological loop. This one processes all the verbal information as well as language information and spoken English, spoken language, everything. Every language or every word is dealt with by this phonological loop. Okay, this one is two things. And then what makes his cunning is, okay, we have two slave systems. One is phonological system, the other one is what? The visual sketchpad. And central executive, okay, something middle is controlling it. Oh, okay, sometime this guy, central executive, sometime, okay, you do it. Command it. Okay, or sometime when some information comes in, okay, you do it. Okay, the central executive is kind of commander. Okay, So, and sometimes you have to use this one, you have to use this one. So what he proposed, the central executive is system for controlling slave systems, means phonological loop and visual sketchpad, like the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonological loop. Okay? So central executive is controlling it. Sometime, okay, you use this one, sometime you use this one. Okay, say like this one. The central executive is the attentional control system. So this one is ordering. If some visual information comes in, visual information comes in, central executive is ordering, okay, you process it. So spatial visual information. But if the word comes in, like when you read the text or something else, okay, now initially you have to read the text from in here. Okay, be careful. When you read the text, there's something different. Okay, central executive is initially ordering, okay, look at the letters. And then if that comes a meaning, okay, like word, okay, that asks to process by the phonological loop. So that's why the arrow is a double arrowed line. Get it? Get it? If the word comes in from your text, initially starting with the visual sketchpad, to read letter by letter, and then when the meaning comes up, that goes into the verbal rehearsal system, phonological loop. Okay, using this working memory, the Baddeley's working memory idea, we can explain many of the symptoms or many of the experimental evidence much easier than Atkins. That's why many people believe this one is latest one. I mean, something better way than Atkins. You get it? But that is only 1980s and 1990s. So he need to improve this model significantly. That's why episodic buffer is newly edited in 2002, I guess, 2003. I don't know exactly how it works, but what he proposed that probably this one is episodic buffer in some way. It cannot be explained by visual spatial working memory, visual spatial sketchpad. It cannot be explained by the phonological loop. So that's why maybe we need some episodic buffer, like event buffer. Maybe something, these two is combined into the episodic buffer. Something, yeah. I mean, that you don't need to remember whole things. I mean, just to basically understand at least one. Okay, so including episodic buffer. Okay, this one is latest model by the Baddeley, and he also ended up with these things of the complete model of working memory. Okay, so this one is long-term memory. Visual sketchpad is access to visual semantics. Okay, and the phonological loop is handling about all the language in the long-term memory, and episodic buffer is episodic long-term memory. So he separate episodic knowledge recently, getting more difficult. Okay, point from this one, this model is well represent our intelligence. Okay, our intelligence, many studies identified intelligence of human being. There are, you know the IQ test? IQ test, intelligence quotient test. So intelligence quotient test testing two things, fluid dynamics and crystallized knowledge. I'm not sure about something, the second one. Okay, so they testing two. Okay, in our human lifetime, that is when you're born, when you get older, crystal knowledge is increased. Okay, until you're dead. Like a language, word, meaning. That's why we believe the older people is much smarter than us to see the old circumstance. Okay, that's the why crystal knowledge is important. So they are it comes into our knowledge. But fluid knowledge is different. So that is around 20 years old. So I'm roughly in here. You guys are around in here, right? Huh? Fluid knowledge is they are increasing pretty much in a very early stage, and then later on is significantly decreasing. So when you have dementia or something else, the gap is too big. So this fluid dynamics is covered by these three things. So what Baddeley's recently proposed is in our intelligence development, say initially when you're young, we're developing this part. Okay, we're developing phonological loop, episodic buffer, visual spatial sketchpad. In that time, game can help you. Video games, visual spatial, okay, or many things can help you. So the education psychologist using these types of things with the many different instructional design to improve each individual's knowledge using this fluid dynamics change. But this one is talking about crystallized knowledge. Okay? So the point about Baddeley's is, okay, this one is never forget, but when you're getting older, crystal knowledge is in long-term memory. However, some part of the linking is broken. So to help elderly people, Alzheimer or dementia thing is, we have to make a link, this one, to make alive this link. So we don't know yet how to make a link between long-term memory and his phonological loop, episodic buffer, and visual spatial sketchpad. So that is the future one. You guys must handling it. Huh? Some people, the doctors or medical people, using some of the chemical stuff, chemical substance, but in psychologists using training the games or training instruction. Okay? So, and some people using the other things. So that's why, so this one is whole hour, by the Baddeley's, that is a whole hour memory structure, and that is our intelligence. So we may find some of the link to strength, okay, make it stronger. So we have to make stronger each of the arrows. So that's the way to dealing with dementia, elderly people, or some knowledge for young children. Okay, right, that's it. So from tomorrow, I can explain how we can strengthen our knowledge skills. So you have to read by this point, and tomorrow I can start from this multiple memory system. No question?